Are you the Keymaster?
Yes. I'm a friend of his. He told me to meet him here.
Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and I found the Keymaster. Yeah! All right, guys, have fun. All right, so we're going to kick this one off by stringing out that bit of open speculation I did about Alexander Macmillan and whether or not he was a puppet or the puppet master of the X Club, that exclusive dining club of 9 men who held a profound influence over scientific thought in the latter half of the 19th century, right? And in the Neolithically Delicious episode, which is where the X Club first came on my radar, I made the observation that the X Club had 9 members, right? But that the letter X is the Roman numeral for 10. And so I openly wondered who the silent or invisible 10th member might be. Could it be God, the crown, the king or queen, or some other anonymous scientist past or present? And we may have answered that question in the personage of Joseph Norman Lockyer, Knight Commander of the Order of Bath and scientist and fellow of the Royal Society and founder of Nature magazine, whose early issues were chock-filled with articles written by members of the X Club. And not only was Norman Lockyer the founder of Nature magazine, he was its managing editor until shortly before he dies in 1920. So that's 50 years, give or take. And so in pegging Norman as an extremely important guy in all of this, I thought it appropriate that Falcon's Maze for him should begin by breaking down his name. And we've looked at both his given names before. Joseph means God will increase. And Norman, of course, Norman means Northman, which is synonymous with Viking. It is absolutely amazing to me that this whole series started with this paper published in Nature magazine, Population Genomics of the Viking World, a paper used by academia to let us know that it's time to say goodbye to the Vikings and that there was never such a thing as a Viking. It is absolutely incredible that the man who founded Nature magazine's name literally translates to one who increases the Vikings. Talk about irony. Of course, Nature magazine today is doing the exact opposite of furthering the cause of the Vikings. You just cannot make this stuff up. And it gets even better because his surname is an occupational surname that means locksmith. Norman is the Keymaster, literally a guardian of gateways. And it was a name that was allegedly first recorded in London in 1273, but apparently has its origins in either Somerset or Dorset, depending on the source. And Dorset, of course, has played a huge role in Mud City, being the home of the Ashley Coopers, the Earls of Shaftesbury, who I'm sure we'll see down the line because the first Earl of Shaftesbury here is one of 8 Lord Proprietors of Carolina, which is, of course, where Alexander Macmillan III makes his final resting place in, of all places, Granville. And speaking of final resting places, Joseph Norman Lockyer makes his in Devon, which is where the name Poe was first recorded. And I think just about every Lord Lieutenant of Ireland we looked at while we were looking into the plantation of Ulster came from, which of course you can make of what you will. Coincidence, not a coincidence, it's just unbelievable. Because his name being locksmith is incredible in many ways, right? I'm certain he saw himself as the locksmith of science, opening doors for some ideas and locking them for others. Just as I'm sure it's a coincidence that he's the key that opens the Sacred Heart of Mud City, because he kicks one of the doors of Mud City's prime directives wide open with his relationship to the X Club. The main reason I started my channel, aside from documenting some of Baltimore's quote-unquote old world architecture and trying to correlate it to the phenomena of mudflood, as our old friend Richard Lopez called it, but it was also a personal response to the mudflood channels that I was watching because, to me, they just weren't digging deep enough. Dissecting old photographs with wild speculation about a lost realm-wide empire, while certainly fun, does nothing to get to the heart of the matter. And that's that if there was a realm-wide cataclysm in the not-too-distant past that was covered up and a new history was created to hide that from those who came after, well then how does that work? If our history is fake, how much of it is fake? Some of it? Most of it? All of it? And if it's true that our history is fake, well then who faked it? Who are the people responsible for these lies? As someone with a lifelong belief that all is not right on this realm, these are the questions that I was hopeful fake history truth channels would be looking into. But it just wasn't coming. Right? So I thought to myself, well, if no one else is going to cover these things, and I needed to do it for myself and decided to share my explorations on YouTube because surely there were others out there in the Mud Flood fake history community that would be interested in this work. And thus, Mud City was born. And now I had no idea what lay ahead or how amazing a journey this show would lead me on, or that Baltimore Fats would develop a life of his own. But here we are. And so if you're a false paradigm speculator, as I prefer to call myself, and you're trying to use what the mainstream narrative gives us to tear down that mainstream narrative, then there may be no better person to tie the whole thing together than the Keymaster. And so I don't often engage in these types of conversations when I'm roaming around Gen Pop, but the main critique around any good conspiracy theory is that they require too many people to keep it a secret. But not in Mud City, where large parts of these conspiracies are self-perpetuating programs unleashed on Gen Pop over 100 years ago. All you would need is some good gatekeeping and lots of distractions to keep people from looking too closely, all the while slowly poisoning them and then dumbing them down, limiting their cognitive abilities. Easy peasy, right? And these self-perpetuating programs begin with religion. And more specifically, as far as this episode is concerned, with the Catholic Church and the office of the Pope, who begin building their indoctrination centers that they call universities in the latter part of the Dark Ages, the 1100s or so. And by the time of the 16th and 17th centuries, their top natural philosophers, like our boy Athanasius Kircher here, realized that there were limits to their natural philosophy. It was only going to take them so far. And so they set about changing that by creating new sciences to profit from. First, through their university system, whose students go on to form societies like the Royal Society, whose expressed purpose is to extend the boundaries of the empire, including the arts and sciences, which are, of course, part of the empire. And so to hide that these new and improved scientific philosophies were the product of a singular agenda, these societies continue to branch out, creating other groups and societies like the X Club and their predecessors, and we're going to get to them later. Not to mention other scientific societies abroad, like America's Philosophical Society and those of Central Europe, like the Danzig Research Center here, which was founded in 1743. Because in Mud City, America has never been independent of the crown, and Mud City also recognizes that the royal families of England and Central and Northern Europe are all the same family. And so to the apophonetic mind, none of this seems like a big stretch. Right? So according to our presented timeline, the polymaths take about 200 or 250 years or so to iron out the kinks and get all their ducks in a row before they start unleashing these ideas on an unsuspecting public through their universities and then later public primary or elementary schools, high schools, whatever, what have you. Right? And so most in Gen Pop scoff at the idea of schools as indoctrination centers, but from this perspective, it's hard to see them as anything less, because students are taught carefully curated curriculums designed by companies like Macmillan. And I would love to be able to dismiss these ideas as my addle-brained apophenia running wild, but I can't, right? Because I've captured the Keymaster, who exposes his true agenda and the agenda of the Royal Societies and offshoot groups like the X Club through his own writing and speeches that he delivers to these self-same organizations. And though his name may mean he who increases the Vikings, he's unfortunately not a paleontologist or an archaeologist or even an anthropologist, for that matter. He's an astronomer who wrote pioneering work on the sun and sunspots and how they may affect weather patterns, and also on archaeoastrology, being the first modern man to observe the astral alignments of Stonehenge and the Giza pyramids, among other places. And so this work places him firmly in the flat earth portion of Mud City, where Master of Reality was headed. And so I'm only going to touch a little bit on some of that work in this episode. But it's also interesting that he wrote the official rule book for golf.
You ever watch golf on television? It's like watching flies fuck.
With this W. Rutherford, who I looked into and is pretty much unconnected to most of this publishing and scientific stuff, which is kind of interesting. And so seeing this list in his bibliography, I went about reading some of these titles and I was gobsmacked because he really lays it all out there in this book, Education and National Progress, Essays and Addresses from 1870 to 1905, or roughly a 35-year period. And of course, it was published by Macmillan in 1906, same year as the Jubilee. And it includes the following essays and addresses, replete with their own little blue check marks. Fact-checked for our safety, I'm sure, right? And the Keymaster, throughout all of these articles, pontificates on the importance of education in England, pleading for the British government to build more universities and educate every Brit in the ways of not only the 3 R's, but also the very new arts and sciences that he and his buddies in the X Club were cooking up, because Britannia was rapidly falling behind America and Prussia in these regards. However, was the empire going to compete with these fast-growing nations and their advanced education systems? England would be steamrolled by these growing powers if they didn't get their gen pop, whom, to believe Lockyer and Haldane, weren't very interested in quote-unquote higher education. Right? But Lockyer is insistent with his demands that not only did the people know things that they had no real interest in knowing, but that they should pay for this education they didn't ask for as well, by making the state pay for all these new universities they needed to build through taxation. New universities, which naturally would need to be well stocked with textbooks written and published by all his friends. Right? He leaves that part out in all of these essays. The best part of this collection may be the introduction, written by the Right Honorable R.B. Haldane, big-time British politician and muckety-muck, known for his relationship with the Germans and for the reforms he implements to the British Army as Secretary of War. And just look at the titles he has. And so he sums up Lockyer's true intentions pretty well in this introduction. And so now I'm going to let the Honorable R.B. Haldane take it from here. And so the Right Honorable Viscount Haldane lets us know what the problem is right in his opening remarks. With the thesis which forms the text of this collection of essays and addresses, I am wholly in agreement. What we most lack in this country is the penetration of the mass of our people by the spirit of higher education, spelling it out that the plebes aren't interested in higher education. They lack the spirit for it. But quickly moving away from these ignorant souls, he moves right on into the industrial military complex when he says that, alike in our peace and in our war organizations, there is wanting the survey based on science. So it's them that are really interested in the science and new technologies, not the people. And so he continues that, without this survey, the grasp which it yields of the relative proportion of things, a vast waste of matter and energy alike, is inevitable. So if we don't give the war machine its scientific progress, all will be lost. Because as a nation, we possess great qualities. Individuality, initiative, courage are distinctive of our people. Which people? Who are our people? Right? Because these people are well fitted to hold our own in the race for supremacy. Is he talking about the British people here? Or is he talking about scientists? Who is it that's racing for supremacy? And I think it's a very amazing statement given the subtext of the Norse code. But regardless, right, the Britons are handicapping themselves by want of the higher training. Such training requires self-submission to hard intellectual discipline, and it is in this self-submission that the majority of our young men are lacking. So now, is it really self-submission, or are you submitting the young men to this? It's an interesting choice of words, and it makes me wonder if the rule of reversal is at play here. But nonetheless, progress is being made, and being made rapidly. The standard of knowledge is rising, and I think that with it, the moral standard is rising. And so, of course, this makes me wonder, who is the arbiter of the moral standard? And so he continues that our people, who are our people, are becoming more temperate, and they are insisting on a higher standard of living. Are they really? But they will go further, so the evidence seems to indicate, if they are well led, right? So we must show them the way. But in order to do that, they need teachers. For the training of the necessary leaders, the higher education is essential, and the universities are its only reliable source. Its only reliable source. Self-education is not reliable, right? One of the satisfactory features of our time is the large increase in the number of our universities within the last 10 years. And so I think this was written in 1905, so between 1895 and 1905, there's been a large increase in the universities. But to hear the Keymaster whine about it, there can never be enough universities, right? And these universities are pretty much funded by the generous endowment from private sources, r.e. rich people. And it seems that some of these rich people may have had enough of footing the bill for all of this and want the people to do it instead. And the Right Honorable Viscount here agrees that the state ought to do more than it does in the way of endowment. I agree with the writer of this book. the Keymaster. But unlike the Keymaster, the Viscount over here is not so sure that he wishes to see the burden transferred to the state in the wholesale fashion that is sometimes suggested, and Lockyer certainly appears to be leading this charge. Haldane would rather that the majority of the public money not be spent unless and until a case for the necessity of such expenditure has been clearly made out. And those that write the checks with the public's money would do well to remember the maxim festina lente, and that means make haste slowly, which I'm going to interpret to mean choose quickly but be well informed. And to close out his introduction to this book with this stance is very interesting, coming from a guy who not just 7 years earlier was responsible for the passing of the London University Act of 1898. And what this act does is it reforms the university and gives it a federal structure with responsibility for monitoring course content and academic standards within its institutions, essentially giving the government control over London University. And so I wonder how many other universities did this act apply? And it makes me wonder how genuine or disingenuine the Right Honorable Viscount is. And so I was going to close this one out with a few choice quotes from the man himself and his essays on education and national progress, but that feels redundant. It's all here and easy to find. I'd much rather close this one out with a few quotes from one of his other works. Being a preeminent astronomer and sun worshipper, I want to take a moment to not forget all the pagan implications of sun worship and keep this story connected to Baltimore. But as this preeminent astronomer, the Keymaster is, of course, a heliocentrist, and he makes significant contributions to the globe model with this book, The Movements of the Earth, which of course was published by Macmillan and Company in 1887. And he kicks this thing off with a corker. Right in the preface, he says, "The present century is remarkable for the manner in which the unity of nature, and therefore the unity of science, which is the study of nature, is being demonstrated to us." Now there is so much to decode in just this first sentence alone. Why is nature capitalized here, but not here? Surely the study of nature includes its unity. Or does the unity of nature, with a capital N, stand for the unity of the scientific societies within the confines of Nature magazine and thus the academic world? Is it that unity which is being demonstrated? Because why is science capitalized? Is this the unity of their new, unnatural philosophies? Because by capitalizing the word science here, it separates it from its ubiquitous form, just like he does by capitalizing the word nature over here. And all of this is very interesting because we're going to see it again. All right, and so he continues, and this is amazing, right? He says that the progress of physical science has been in this wise. As man has grown older, the earth on which we dwell has dwindled down. It began as the center of the universe. It has ended as a small mass of matter revolving around what probably is a small star. Probably a small star? You mean you're not sure? But although the progress of science has been thus in a way to degrade the earth, man's intellect has been a distinct gainer by the process. For it is not too much to say that as the earth's place in nature has dwindled down, so has man's mental horizon been extended. And so again, here we see that he's talking about the earth and nature, but he does so with the lowercase n, essentially saying that science elevates man over nature. And nature, of course, is allegedly our habitat, right? And that science degrades the earth by making it less important than the progress of man, or more pointedly, the progress of science. The earth and nature shrink before the progress of science. And so for those looking for proof that scientists back then were looking to sever the ties between man and God, this is a really amazing statement. And so he continues, astronomy may be very sharply divided into two distinct branches. One, which I will call mechanical astronomy, which deals with the motions and the exquisite order of the motions of the heavenly bodies, and another, which I will call physical astronomy, which concerns itself not so much with the motions of the masses themselves as with the motions of the molecules of which these masses are built up. So he's talking about microbiology and chemistry here, and it's no coincidence that those microsciences were about to take off in the decades that followed this once scientists successfully legislated the natural, in quotes, out of things like food and medicine, which the Keymaster successfully predicts is going to happen here. We shall draw upon mechanical astronomy for those facts which will enable us to form an idea of the Earth's place in nature as a member of a system of planets traveling round a star. and then upon the newer astronomy for those others which will furnish us with ideas of its place in nature, so far as the past, present, and future of its constituent molecules are concerned. The new microastronomy and its place in nature, capitalized. Are they talking about its place in the false nature that the Keymaster here and his buddies are constructing? Because he cuts history in on this action too. Whilst last of all, and I say last of all because I am now dealing with the most recent of the sciences, geology, because it's through geology that archaeology is born. Right? They wouldn't be finding any fossils or buried Viking ships if they weren't digging for something. Right? So to close this one out with a cherry, right, a little later on in this book, he says this: "It has already been said that when the sciences to which attention will have to be called later on were founded, very few people on this planet knew that it moved at all. But it is now generally known that the Earth does move. It will be obvious, however, that whether the Earth moves or not, it's not a closed issue in his mind." And that's unbelievable. All right, so I'm going to close this one out here, and we're going to pick it up in the next club hopping episode. All right, remember guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies. Until the next one, cheers.